Okay, let's unpack this. We often hear about global conflicts as just, chaos or instability.
Right. Just noise.
Exactly. But what if that chaos isn't just random? What if it's like a system that actually rewards division?
Uh-huh.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into Libya. Our sources are describing it as undergoing a form of, well, modern Balkanization.
And that term really hits it. It's not simply internal fighting.
No, it's this profound hybrid phenomenon. So our mission today is really to uncover why this is happening, what's really driving it.
Yeah, and what's truly eye-opening here, I think, is that this hybrid phenomenon, as you called it, it's not purely an internal breakdown. Not at all.
Okay.
It's shaped by these huge power vacuums, severe economic fragmentation, and just deeply tangled geopolitical interests.
So these aren't just side issues.
No, they're actively sustaining the division in the country. We're going to try and untangle that really intricate web.
And to do that, we've basically taken a stack of sources, articles, some cutting-edge research, our own notes, and boiled them down.
Distilled the key stuff.
Yeah, to the absolute essentials. Think
Yeah.
of this deep dive as like your shortcut to understanding the surprising facts, the motivations that really explain why Libya is the way it is, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And we'll get into the nuanced roles of local factions, moving way beyond just the simple warlord narrative you often hear.
Right, that's too simple.
Way too simple.
Yeah.
Then we'll connect that directly to the competing interests of regional and global powers.
Yeah.
Turkey, Russia, even Western nations.
Okay.
And critically, we'll uncover how the actual economics of fragmentation, the money side, acts as this powerful driving force. We just think about how often we hear about conflicts, but we rarely get to really understand the deep underlying economic incentives keeping them going.
Yeah, that's a great point because when we talk about Libya's fragmentation, you usually hear warlords, maybe tribalism.
Standard explanations.
Right. But our sources make it really clear this overlooks much deeper systemic conditions. To really understand it, we have to start with the history, don't we?
Absolutely, you have to. The colonial legacies, for instance, left Libya without a truly coherent national identity, or importantly, robust decentralized governance.
Okay, so the foundations were weak.
Very weak. And then the 2011 NATO-led intervention. Well, it removed Gaddafi, sure, but it completely dismantled the central state with no viable plan for what came next.
No reconstruction plan.
Pretty much nothing concrete. And that just created this enormous, sudden power vacuum.
So these local factions and militias, many popping up from the revolutionary forces, they just stepped into that void.
Exactly.
But it wasn't just about grabbing territory, was it? How did they actually establish and, maintain their power once the central state was gone?
Well, it's fascinating how quickly they set up these intricate patronage networks.
Patronage networks.
Yeah, and these weren't just about military muscle. They were about controlling oil facilities, smuggling routes, and crucially, leveraging external sponsors. Think of it like a loyalty program.
Okay.
But instead of points, you get access to oil money or, illicit trade routes.
That's a powerful analogy. And we see these rival administrations, right? Like the Tripoli-based GNU Government of National Unity and then the Benghazi-based one, the Government of National Stability, aligned with Haftar. They're basically ruling what have become these sort of quasi-independent zones and constantly vying for control over key revenue places like the central bank and the National Oil Corporation.
Precisely.
So it's not just land, it's the actual financial levers of the country. That's a really crucial distinction.
It is. And these factions, they aren't static either. They frequently shift alliances. They even negotiate informally across the dividing lines.
Really? Even across enemy lines?
Yeah, it shows the fragmentation isn't just about physical borders. It's about the very logic of governance itself, or maybe the lack of it at a national level.
It really paints a picture of a system where these internal power vacuums are almost like inviting external forces in.
Beckoning them, yeah.
And these external actors, they're not just jumping in blindly, are they? They have very specific agendas. Let's maybe start with Egypt. What are their main drivers here, according to the sources?
Well, Egypt, for instance, they primarily support the eastern factions. The main goal seems to be insulating their own western border from Islamist militancy and containing political Islam generally. They see stability through a very specific security lens.
Okay, border security and ideology. Is that a common thread across the region? Or are other neighbors like Algeria and Tunisia playing a different hand?
They have different priorities. Algeria, for example, largely prioritizes non-intervention, officially anyway, but they also really want to avoid being sidelined in the region's gas export race. There's an economic angle there too.
Right.
And Tunisia, well, they have strong economic ties to Western Libya, so they're deeply concerned about any spillover instability affecting their own, frankly, fragile economy.
Makes sense. Then you have the Gulf states, the UAE and Saudi Arabia backing Haftar. It seems clear they want to counteract Muslim Brotherhood-linked groups.
That's part of it.
But it's also clearly driven by competition for future oil deals, infrastructure projects, kind of positioning themselves for influence in whatever comes next economically. It's all about those future stakes.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, you've got Qatar and Turkey aligning more closely with the Western side, the JNU. They often frame their support as backing legitimate UN-recognized authorities.
That's the public line.
That's the public line. But they also have a clear agenda, reshaping the Mene order, maybe towards more Islamist-leaning governance, and securing significant economic deals, especially gas exploration rights for Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's huge for them.
So these alignments have basically turned Libya into this deeply polarized regional battlefield.
Profoundly regionalized, yes, where every ceasefire or election proposal immediately triggers suspicion because you know there are layers of proxy interests just underneath the surface.
Okay, we've looked at their strategic, maybe ideological interests, but our sources point to something even more subtle with Turkey and Russia. It's almost like they're playing a longer game, using economic leverage that's kind of masked as military strategy. Can you explain that dynamic? Because that sounds particularly, well, insidious.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how deliberate their approach seems to be. Turkey's involvement, for example, is deeply rooted in historical Ottoman ties, but also very practical things like maritime boundary agreements they signed with the GNU.
Okay.
This significantly boosts Turkish influence in those contested East Mediterranean gas zones we mentioned. Their military support drones, training, maritime logistics has directly led to business contracts, port development deals, arms sales.
So the military support opens economic doors.
Directly. Turkey is even positioning itself as a mediator now, while simultaneously consolidating its economic and military gains in the West. It's a very integrated strategy.
And Russia seems to have a similar playbook, just maybe on the other side?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Russia's rationale looks like a mix of strategic positioning, getting a foothold in the Med, securing energy access, and very clearly counter-Western posturing.
Pushing back against NATO.
Right. The Wagner Group, and now whatever succeeds it, they've embedded themselves in critical strategic spots like oil fields and air bases. This gives Haftar significant leverage. Russia frames its presence as, a response to NATO overreach, arguing it's restoring strategic balance. But all the while, they're pursuing energy concessions, lucrative arms contracts, and just broader political influence.
So both Turkey and Russia are using this mix of tactical cooperation on the ground and economic negotiations.
To entrench their influence, yeah. Making fragmentation almost a tool rather than just a side effect of how they engage.
Okay, so we've seen how regional players are involved, deeply involved. But what about the powers that actually initiated the intervention back in 2011, the Western nations, NATO? How have their roles evolved from that intervention to what our sources seem to call policy paralysis?
Yeah, that's a critical shift to understand. The 2011 NATO-led intervention, as we said, removed Gaddafi, but left absolutely no viable institution-building strategy in its wake.
Just left a void.
A massive void. And that abrupt power vacuum was truly the foundational cause of Libya's unraveling. And since then, Western actors have remained crucial players, but often ambiguous ones. France and Italy, for example, both highly reliant on Libyan energy and deeply concerned about migration flows.
Right. Those are key interests for them.
Huge interests. And they have historically supported rival factions.
I see. So Italy tends to lean toward the GNU in Tripoli, partly to secure its gas imports and try to stop migrant flows from that coast.
Correct.
While France has often supported Haftar in the east, maybe seeing him as a more secular, disciplined military force, particularly in the strategic Fezzan region in the south. It sounds like their priorities are still very much tied to their own national interests, sometimes conflicting ones.
That's exactly right. And the EU as a whole, well, without a truly unified strategy, it seems to have focused primarily on migration deterrence, often outsourcing border control to militia-run entities, like the Libyan Coast Guard.
Which ironically sounds like it would just inadvertently reinforce the power of those very local armed groups you were talking about earlier.
It absolutely does. It feeds the system. And the United States, well, post-Obama, they've had a pretty unclear Libya doctrine, kind of oscillating between counterterrorism objectives, concern over the Russian presence, and then some re-engagement in energy diplomacy.
So no clear, consistent line.
The overall picture is a distinct lack of strategic coherence from the West. Western powers, in essence, seem to be prioritizing managing the symptoms, migrants, extremists, oil supply disruptions, rather than addressing the root causes.
Which are?
The fragmentation itself, the parallel institutions, the unequal access to wealth, those core problems.
So what does this all mean when we really get down to the heart of the issue? Our sources make it undeniably clear that these economics of fragmentation are a massive, almost insidious driving force behind everything.
They really are. Libya's enormous oil wealth, particularly concentrated in the Sirte Basin, it's both the prize everyone wants and the battleground they fight over. Rival factions actively try to redirect the National Oil Corporation revenues. This leads to blockades, parallel budgeting systems, and these highly lucrative weapons for oil patronage networks we touched on. It's a system really designed for extraction, not national benefit.
And it's not just oil, is it? The sources talk about extensive smuggling economies, fuel, migrants, arms, that fund these militias and local authorities.
Absolutely critical funding streams.
It seems these networks actually depend on the absence of a strong central authority, making peace or unification economically disadvantageous for many of these powerful actors. It's almost like a self-sustaining loop of instability.
It functions exactly like that.
When you hear about these sort of perverse incentives, what's the most striking example that stood out from your research?
For me, the most striking example is how even migration detention centers, which are often controlled by militias, sometimes receive European funding for their upkeep or operations.
Wow.
Yeah. This creates these really perverse incentives for local actors to actually perpetuate the instability and the human rights abuses associated with them, because maintaining the problem literally generates revenue.
So controlling the crisis becomes profitable.
Exactly. And let's not forget the foreign contractors, private security firms, black market traders, who all thrive in this kind of chaos, often with links back to international firms who are kind of hedging their bets on Libya's eventual reopening.
Right.
The economic logic in Libya today, fundamentally, it rewards those who perpetuate fragmentation much more than it rewards those who might invest in unification.
It's a stark and, frankly, deeply troubling reality. And while we've focused a lot on the internal actors and the Western and regional powers, it's worth noting, I think, that some other global players like China and the African Union, they're also involved, right? Albeit with a very different approach. What are their strategies?
Yes, their roles are quite distinct. China, for instance, has largely maintained a non-military, very much economics-first engagement. They're seeking oil contracts, infrastructure projects down the line.
Playing the long game.
Playing the long game. They maintain diplomatic neutrality, generally speaking, positioning themselves as a potential long-term reconstruction partner, but only once conditions stabilize.
Okay. And the African Union?
Well, the AU, for its part, has consistently called for African-led peace processes, African solutions for African problems. But they remain hampered by regional rivalries within Africa itself, notably between, say, Algeria and Egypt. And they often just have limited diplomatic traction with Libya's key factions on the ground.
Not enough clout.
Not enough leverage, really. So these actors, China and the AU, they advocate for inclusive talks, dialogue, but they simply lack the influence, the pull of the more militarized stakeholders we've been discussing.
Right. So bringing this all together, then, our deep dive makes it abundantly clear. Libya's fragmentation isn't just simple chaos. It's definitely not purely organic.
No.
It's profoundly rooted in specific historical legacies. We talked about the colonial past, the post-2011 institutional collapse, and, crucially, as we just discussed, in these economic incentives that directly reward division.
And just to reiterate that point, local militias, local elites, they actively benefit from controlling territory and resources. Their power literally stems from maintaining fragmentation through controlling oil revenue, border smuggling, external patronage. Division is the source of their power, not just a consequence of conflict. And we've seen how those regional powers intervene, driven by ideologies, strategic geography, their economic stakes in future oil markets, effectively turning Libya into a proxy arena. And Russia and Turkey in particular seem to actively deepen this fragmentation, often framing their involvement as some kind of counterbalance to Western or, rival Arab influence.
And as our sources really highlight, Western powers are directly implicated in Libya's initial destabilization and now struggle to offer a coherent path towards reunification.
Big struggle there.
Often undermining stability, maybe unintentionally, in pursuit of narrow goals like migration control or specific security concerns. Meanwhile, actors like China and the AU, while perhaps constructive in their approach, they just lack the leverage of the more militarized stakeholders.
So what our sources really hammer home is that Libya isn't just falling apart. In a way, it's actually being rebuilt, but rebuilt across new, unofficial lines, constantly reinforced by these outside interests. Balkanization in Libya, as one source puts it, is not simply a breakdown. It is a reconstitution of power across new, informal, and externally reinforced terrains.
A reconstitution of power. That's a powerful phrase. So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, it means any lasting solution in Libya has to move beyond just the superficial fixes, like temporary ceasefires or rushing elections.
Those won't cut it on their own.
No, it has to address the underlying international economic and political structures that make this fragmentation so lucrative, so beneficial for so many powerful players in the first place. Maybe something to think about is how often economic incentives, sometimes hidden ones, perpetuate conflict in ways we might not immediately see.